There's a moment in every family, a quiet shift when things stop being normal. It doesn't always come with a loud crash. Sometimes, it's just the subtle sound of a door closing, a shift of power. You don't see it coming. At least, I didn't. I was standing there, my hands trembling slightly as I filled their glasses. It wasn't like I hadn't done this 1,000 times before dinner, the usual chatter, their expectations. But tonight felt different. I noticed it in the way William adjusted his tie, his fingers a bit unsteady. I could almost taste the nervousness that clung to the room. Maxwell was speaking to him, the kind of conversation you'd expect. Business. The same endless talk about money and power, but I could see through it. I knew exactly what Maxwell was doing. I knew what was coming, and I was ready. I stayed quiet, filling their glasses, watching as Maxwell slid the forged document across the table. They didn't even notice me, but I wasn't the one who was invisible tonight. I didn't make a sound as I set the picture down. This wasn't a place for words anymore. This is how she remembers it. They had no idea what I'd already done. They had no idea that every number, every file I had touched, every piece of their empire, was mine now. The control was mine, and they didn't even see the walls closing in. They thought they were in charge. The thing about my father, William, is that he doesn't need to shout to make himself heard. He never raised his voice, but it always felt like his words carried weight, heavy. He'd sit back, smooth out his tie, and look at me like I was just a minor inconvenience. One of those little things that didn't need attention. I could see it in the way he'd glance at me, like I was a ghost in the room, just something to be overlooked. Maxwell's about to make us proud. He said, I wasn't sure if he meant the words for me, but I knew they weren't for me. They never were. Maxwell was leaned back in his chair, like he owned the whole place. He probably thought he did, in a way. His voice was smooth, all confidence and charm, like the whole world owed him something. I've got this deal locked up. All the numbers check out. This is it, Dad. This is going to make everything right. Yeah, everything was going to be right if you could just keep lying long enough. I wasn't sure how long I'd let him keep doing this, but I wasn't about to tell him that. I couldn't. Not in front of my father. The silence between us was thick, almost like we were all waiting for something to happen. Maxwell was tapping his fingers on the table. I could hear the soft clink of the glass as I set it down in front of him. It wasn't the first time I'd served them. But tonight felt different. I didn't need to say anything. I just watched as Maxwell smiled, thinking he had it all under control. He had no idea that the rug was about to be pulled out from under him. No clue. I wasn't about to make a sound. Not yet. Maxwell leaned back, the leather of the expensive chair creaking under his unearned confidence. He looked every bit the high-reward asset my father worshipped, his fingers drumming a rhythmic, arrogant beat against the mahogany tabletop. To anyone else, he was a genius on the verge of a breakthrough. To me, he was a sinking ship trying to sell lifeboats. So, you're certain the liquidity is verified? William's voice was low, carrying the gravelly weight of a man who had bet his entire legacy on his son. I saw his eyes flicker a micro-expression of doubt that Maxwell was too blinded by ego to catch. Maxwell didn't just nod, he performed. He leaned forward, sliding a thick envelope across the table like it was a holy relic. Trust me, Dad. The buy-in is $500,000. Blackwood Partners is a closed door, and I've just turned the key. The projections aren't just solid, they're exponential. I stood in the shadows, my hands steady on the condensation-slicked pitcher. My father pushed the papers back without looking. He wasn't checking the math, he was checking Maxwell's conviction. It was a gambler's tell, not an investor's. I let my gaze drop to the documents. Through the glass of the boardroom, the sunlight caught the edges of the certified bank statements. My mind didn't see paper, It saw the digital fingerprints I had analyzed hours ago. The font kerning on the Capital One logo was off by a fraction. The metadata on the original PDF, which I had already intercepted through my shell company's server, showed it had been exported from a trial version of Adobe Acrobat at 2:00 a.m. "Don't worry, Dad," Maxwell added, his voice dripping with synthetic charm. "We're golden. I just need your green light on the collateral." The air in the room felt heavy, charged with the static of a looming disaster. I took a step forward, the ice in the pitcher clinking softly, the only honest sound in the room. "Maxwell." I broke in, my voice a calm, professional blade. "Compliance requires the digital original for blockchain verification before the Asia markets open. I think it's time you sent that PDF directly to the firm's portal." The smug curve of his lips didn't just fade, it froze. The silence that followed was suffocating, heavy with the ozone scent of a coming storm. Maxwell began to fidget, his fingers ghosting over the edge of his briefcase. He was still trying to project the image of a shark, but the way he avoided the gaze of the monitor on the wall told a different story. He was a man standing on a trap door, desperately trying to ignore the lever in my hand. "You're absolutely certain." Maxwell Williams' voice cracked a hairline fracture in his granite facade. He wanted to believe the lie, but his survival instinct was finally screaming, "Of course, Dad. High velocity, high reward. You taught me that." Maxwell grinned, but the expression was too wide, too brittle. His eyes flickered toward me, searching for a sign of the submissive sister he thought he knew. I didn't give him the satisfaction. I adjusted the silver tray with clinical precision, my eyes fixed on the clock. Each tick of the second hand felt like a hammer blow against his resolve. He reached for his phone, then stopped. He was caught in the classic gambler's dilemma fold now and admit failure or double down on a forged hand. "The portal is waiting." "Maxwell," I said, my voice cutting through his spiraling thoughts like a scalpel. I wasn't the invisible observer anymore. I was the auditor. David Grant, the CCO of the fund, is on the line. He's noted that the hard copy you provided doesn't have a matching hash verification code in their database. He blinked, a bead of sweat tracing a path down his temple. Time for what he stammered, his charm finally dissolving into raw panic. "Time to transmit the original PDF," I replied, stepping into the light of the boardroom table, "directly from your bank's server. If the funds are there, the verification will be instant. If not..." I didn't need to finish the sentence. Maxwell froze, his hand trembling as it hovered over his laptop bag. The air in the room didn't just shift, numbed by the cold reality of the digital noose. It died. The monitor on the boardroom wall hummed to life, casting a cold, blue pallor over my father's shocked face. Maxwell was paralyzed, his fingers hovering over his keyboard as if touching it would trigger an explosion. "I don't understand," William barked, his old-world arrogance struggling to regain its footing. "Why is the compliance officer talking to you? Sophia, sit down and finish the service." I didn't sit. I walked to the head of the mahogany table, the seat Maxwell usually occupied, and plugged my phone into the system's interface. "Service is over. Dad, it's time for the audit." The screen flickered, displaying a real-time forensic data stream. On the left, the certified statement Maxwell had just transmitted. On the right, a red highlighted analysis of the file's metadata. "Document A," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "A Capital One bank statement showing a balance of $500,412. Exported from a PDF editor 90 minutes ago. The font used for the digits is a 3% mismatch from the bank's standard Helvetica. It's not just a lie." "Maxwell, it's uttering a forged document." Maxwell's face went a sickly shade of gray. "Sophia, stop. You're making a scene." It was just a placeholder. Document B, I cut him off, tapping the screen. A new window opened, displaying the incorporation records of Blackwood Partners. At the bottom, under the section for majority creditor, my name appeared in bold, black letters, Sophia Ward. The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear my father's shallow, ragged breathing. I didn't just warn the firm about your fraud. Maxwell, I whispered, leaning in until I could see the sweat on his brow. I bought the debt you were about to sign. I own the firm. I own the CCO. And as of 30 seconds ago, when you hit send on that forged federal document, I own your freedom. Maxwell's fingers twitched over his phone, but he didn't hit send. His face had drained of color, and I could see the panic setting in behind his eyes. You can't just, he started, voice cracking, but I cut him off. No, I said, walking closer. You can't just, you've been lying for so long. Maxwell, I don't think you even remember what the truth looks like anymore. His mouth opened, but the words didn't come out. His usual bravado was gone, replaced by something unfamiliar fear. Real fear. I stood there for a moment, letting the silence swallow him whole. I didn't need to say more. His own guilt was doing the work for me. I glanced at my father, who was sitting silently, watching the exchange but saying nothing. I didn't need his approval. I wasn't waiting for it anymore. This was my moment, and I wasn't going to let it slip away. Maxwell's voice broke the stillness, weak and defensive. This isn't... You didn't think it through. Did you? I said quietly, stepping back, my fingers tapping against the edge of the table. All it took was one mistake. And now, it's mine. Maxwell finally reached for his phone, but it was already too late. The trap had been set. The room had contracted. The $4 million Malibu view outside the window suddenly feeling like a painted backdrop to a crumbling stage. William's face, usually a mask of granite authority, was now a map of fractured pride. Sophia, he began, but the name lacked its usual edge of dismissal. It was a plea disguised as a question. What is this you? You can't possibly own Blackwood. I didn't blink. The years of being treated as a sunk cost rose up, not as heat, but as the absolute zero of a professional investor. I tapped the monitor, bringing up the family's consolidated debt profile, a spiderweb of loans, all leading back to one source. For 30 years. You treated Maxwell as a blue-chip asset while I was the liability you wished you'd never underwritten. I said, my voice steady and cold, but assets are only valuable if they produce. Maxwell isn't an asset. Dad, he's a Ponzi scheme you've been funding with your legacy. William's jaw clenched, his eyes flickering to the quitclaim deed I had placed on the table. He finally saw the math. Maxwell's attempted fraud wasn't just a mistake. It was the leverage I needed to initiate a hostile takeover of the Ward estate. Don't do this, Sophia, he whispered, his voice cracking like dry parchment. This is your family. No, I corrected him, sliding the pen toward his shaking hand. This is a restructuring, and, as of today, I'm the only one with the liquidity to keep you afloat. The air in the room was stagnant, the silence heavy with the finality of a closing bell. William's hand hovered over the deed in lieu of foreclosure, the gold nib of his pen trembling just inches above the signature line. He looked aged, the myth of his invincibility dissolving in the blue light of the monitor. Dad, Maxwell croaked, his voice stripped of its bravado. Don't. We can fight this. But we both knew there was no fight left. David Grant, my CCO, was already holding the phone, waiting for my signal to transmit the fraud report to the district attorney. I've poured every cent into you. Maxwell, William whispered, his eyes fixed on the son who had finally bankrupted his soul. Everything. The sentiment is irrelevant now, I said, sliding the binding term sheet closer. The house is already collateral for the debt I purchased. You aren't losing it today. William, you lost it the moment you let Maxwell forge a bank's seal. This signature is simply the price of his freedom. With a jagged, desperate motion, he signed. The ink bled into the heavy parchment, a permanent record of his surrender. I pulled the document back, checking the witness line. Congratulations, I said, my voice as cold as a bank vault. You've just executed the first honest transaction of your life. The house felt different now. It was still the same house, but it wasn't ours anymore. Not in the way it used to be. I stood in the living room, looking out the window at the view, and everything felt quieter. The weight of what had just happened was heavy, but not in a bad way. It was just final. Maxwell and my father were still at the table, talking in low voices, but I could barely hear them. I didn't need to. I didn't need to hear any more. It was done. I sat down in the chair, letting the silence fill the space around me. I hadn't expected this moment to feel like this. I'd thought I'd feel triumphant, like I'd won. But I didn't. It was just over. And maybe that was the point. There were no grand speeches, no final confrontations, just the slow realization that I'd spent so many years chasing after something that wasn't ever going to come. Approval, recognition. It didn't matter. What mattered was this. I had finally built my own life, and that was enough. Maybe that's what this was all about. Not winning. Not getting revenge, just realizing that I didn't need them anymore. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. Sophia Ward's story isn't about the loud victories or grand gestures. It's about the quiet moments, the ones that shape you when you least expect it.